So getting on to our first question, what is the purpose of government? And the first three questions I'm going to combine into one. So what is the purpose of government? What is it there for? And then what is the scope of government? These are all very related, but there's fleshing it out in a little bit different ways. What is the scope of it? And then what is the bounds of it? Because sometimes there's no boundaries on government. Right. And so what is those limitations? Right. What is it supposed to touch? What is the purpose of it?
Okay. So in broad terms, the purpose of government is to restrain evil and allow good to flourish. I think that the answer to that question, obviously our founders spent a lot of time doing this as they created a really a new type or form of government, the first government that was really based on a set of ideals and principles that rights come from God rather than rights coming from government, from the king. And so when you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, everybody should know this. It's just known that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among those, this is an exhaustive list, but among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so, for the most part, God has given us rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And that to protect those rights, that's not exactly how it goes, but in order to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men. And so government is instituted not to give us those rights, but to secure those rights so that other people don't take those rights away from us, particularly so that the government doesn't take those away from us. And that the governments that are instituted by men, and this goes to the bounds, derive their power from the consent of the governed. They're just powers from the consent of the government, the consent of the governed. And so when the government is acting justly, it's doing so with the consent of the people that put them in power. And so the bounds of the government, the bounds of any government, really, whether it's a good government, a bad government, a tyranny, whatever it is what the people let the government get away with. And so that's always ultimately it. Even if you had a dictatorship, a tyranny, he is only allowed to be a tyrant because the people allow him to continue in power. And so there is, so that consent can be under duress, certainly. And I think at times we feel like that even in our democracy, like, well, I didn't consent to that. Well, collectively, we have consented to that. And so I would say that's the bounds of government.
Okay, so that was a good discussion on the bounds of government insofar as the people are a check and a balance against the authority and tyranny of government. What would you say are the bounds of government, what they should be? Okay, so let's say you have a society where they have rejected or they do not support their government. Are they still held to a particular standard as governing authorities, even if the people themselves don't support their ends?
Okay, so if we're looking, the government, all governments are instituted by God and will be accountable to God, just as the governed will be accountable to God. And so a just government is going to look to biblical law and natural law to determine what it's allowed to do or what it should do.